Right, I'll share the screen.
Okie dokie.
There we go.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Stunning turnout. I think we're up over 80 attendees, which is fantastic news. So Ian, Davey and myself from TBAT are going to be running this short webinar really about the latest and urgent changes that HMRC have put through regarding R&D tax claims. So Ian's going to do the bulk of the talking. We're going to do this a bit like a fireside chat. So I'll be asking Ian questions as we go along and trying to clarify any of the comments Ian's making. Please put any questions that you have as we go along into the chat. I will be monitoring the chat, and then where relevant, I'll introduce those questions as we go along. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I think we're due to run for about 45 minutes. So that would be great. If you could turn your microphones off and your cameras, that would be great. We've had some innovation already on the webinar with one person using a piece of purple post-it note to switch their camera off. But yeah, all good stuff. Okay, we are recording the webinar, so please be aware of that. So just as kind of a bit of a way of background, so year on year, HMRC have generally been improving the R&D tax regimes for both the SMEs and for large companies. They started getting worried about fraud, and rightly so. And I think it was the Office of National Statistics said that there was some £300 million worth of fraud. We did actually ask for a freedom of information to back up that claim, and they've been unable to send us any information that actually says where they got that number from. But anyway, I think everybody's aware that within the HMRC R&D tax claims, there are some nefarious claims and there are some fraudulent claims. And it's only right, really, that HMRC, who has a responsibility for the public purse, that they start to clamp down a bit and make sure that only genuine R&D is actually claimed. So at the end of the day, we're all taxpayers and we want the best use of our money. So they have been changing their stance on what is R&D and the reporting and the values. So that's what this webinar is all about. It's to get people up to speed on what the changes have been, how that's going to impact claims moving forward, and most importantly, we want to be talking about what's happening from the 1st of August. The HMRC does run something called the RDCC, which is a committee of sort of bodies like ourselves, TBAT, where we are professional about delivering R&D tax credit support to companies and also accountants and the like. They're on that committee. That was meant to take place earlier on in June. It's got delayed into July. I imagine that's because there have been an awful lot of questions around how come inquiries are taking so long to resolve, and why do they not actually accept what R&D is from different standpoints. But anyway, we'll touch on that as we go through the webinar. So Ian, I've wobbled on enough about the background about what we're going to be talking about. So if you want to get cracking, that would be great. As I say, folks, please put any questions in the chat and we'll do our best to answer those as we go along.
Yeah.
Ian.
Okay. Thanks. Right. Okay. So everybody can you see the slides?
I can.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're not going to go through the technicals of what R&D tax credit is. Just got a couple of slides just as a quick reminder. Obviously, R&D tax credits is about seeking an advance in science and technology, and that's where HMRC's focus is really going along. And in order to understand and do that, you need to understand what the baseline is of what's in your sector, of what is the current technology and what's available to you to be able to create that advance. So there are obviously two schemes. These rates are applicable up to the 31st of March 2023. So for the SME scheme, that gives you roughly 25% of benefit if you're profitable, 33% if you're loss making. For the RDEC, it was about 10%. Going forward, they're equalised the scheme such that as a profitable business, you're around about 15% to 19% as a profitable business. And then loss making, it can vary whether you're in research intensive or not, but they've greatly reduced the level of benefit on the SME scheme. HMRC's view is that will be less attractive to fraud. I don't believe that. I think fraudsters will still go after the scheme.
Yeah,
So
I think with that one move there, Ian, what they've done is that they've reduced fraud, but all they've done is reduce the cost of fraud to the public purse, but not probably reduce the amount of claims that are fraudulent.
no,
So it's a bit of a classic using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but everybody suffers in the long term. Hopefully, they're looking at that, and they have changed that position, as you say, Ian, with the R&D intensive companies. And I think we come on to that a little bit later, don't we? With
yes,
some
yes.
clear sharing
So
of
we'll
what the
go
two
through what HMRC's approach is has been over the last couple of years. So as a bit of background, these are just some of the headlines that have appeared in some of the national papers and different organisations. And it's really pushing the focus onto HMRC to show that they are in control of the two schemes, that they can show that they are looking to address the fraud and the boundary pushing that agents are putting through, that companies are putting through. And how are they addressing that going forward? Because until a couple of years ago, people talked about, HMRC's approved my R&D claim. We don't believe that they ever approved a claim. They probably just processed it. Oh, sorry, that's don't know what happened there.
And that's the end of the slideshow, folks.
Yes, that was a bit of a run through. I don't know what happened there. So the pressure is on HMRC to show that they are really in control of the scheme and that they're making good use of the public purse going forward. As part of the legislation change that are going through, there were a series of Lords Committee meetings, finance bill meetings, that were looking at the R&D claims and the process that HMRC is going through, the proposed changes, what's happened historically, what's happening internationally. And out of that, there was a series of recommendations. Now, it didn't come out particularly positively for HMRC because the Lords Committee actually was still quite critical of the approach that HMRC were taking. So legislation changes, they didn't believe that they were going to be as effective in isolation. The compliance capability needs to be improved massively. There needs to focus and target approach to identifying suspect claims, and also have a greater focus on the agents that are putting claims through to identify the kind of more rogue ones.
I think when you're saying agents there, Ian, that's not that's anybody who has assisted a company to make a claim.
Yes.
So that can be accountants, that can be companies like ourselves, it can be private consultants as well, can't it? It's people who have assisted.
That's generally companies that are assisting in claims, and up until now, companies have been able to stay under the radar because there's no requirement to report if you've been assisted on a claim. They recognise that some of the benefits, the mathematics, cloud computing, and data licensing costs is a good move, and it's not that positive that they're not sure that this is really going to be as effective as it could be. So moving on to
the second point from the bottom there, Ian, is around the overseas subcontract, isn't it? And
yes.
So the UK, in both through HMRC and through organisations like Innovate UK, are trying to keep UK taxpayers' money funding R&D in the UK to upskill UK people and to retain talent here in the UK. And so one of the measures they brought in was the stopping of using overseas subcontract to deliver projects.
Yeah.
And that was one of those. So just a quick reminder, folks, if you can turn your cameras off when you join, please, that would be fantastic. And just to reiterate, we are recording this for putting out on our website. So yeah, Ian, please carry on.
Okay. So we're going to go through some of the changes that are happening or been happening recently. So obviously some of the rates have changed for the SME scheme. They've reduced the rates such that for a profitable business, it used to be 25p in the pound. It's now 16 or 22p in the pound, depending upon whether you're 19 or 25% corporation tax rate. But the loss-making companies, the early stage companies, before the budget earlier in the year, we're going to drop from 33p in the pound down to 19p in the pound, which was a massive drop. Now in the budget, they changed that and introduced this research intensive, which means that you back up to about 27p in the pound. Not as good as it used to be.
And that's where you're spending 40% of your
yes.
costs in your company are on R&D activities.
Yeah, so it's research intensive, but that's on the group.
So quick question there, Ian. You may not be able to answer this because it's a really tricky, techie one. So often a company does R&D and they may have £1 million budget for R&D, but when you look at the qualifying costs that they can have in a claim, it might be £500,000. And so do we know whether that 40% is on their total cost of investment in R&D, or is it just on the eligible cost of their R&D is 40%?
So
do we know?
So the eligible cost, if they've spent £500,000 and some of that is on subcontractors, and obviously you can only take maximum 65% on subcontractors, you might reduce that claim down to, say, an actual eligible cost of £400,000. Now, because that £400,000 is 40% of the £1 million, therefore they're classed as research intensive. So it's what the eligible cost is that's being put through as part of the claim. Obviously they've increased the RDEC rate, which is predominantly for large companies, in order to make it more competitive internationally. So that was their focus, to try and sort of encourage larger companies to cite their R&D in the UK. They've included maths, data and cloud computing costs. Cloud computing costs didn't exist 20 years ago. So they recognized that R&D and how R&D is done has changed over the time. And then overseas subcontract costs are now ineligible after the 1st of April 2024. Now, there are some caveats to that. So if you are performing R&D because of social or environmental reasons abroad, then that is legitimate to do that because those conditions don't exist in the UK. So there are some caveats to that where you can include some overseas subcontractor costs.
So an example of that might be doing a medical trial overseas where it's allowed to happen in one country but not here in the UK, or it's a country-specific disease area that needs to be looked at. So you have to do it overseas to get the right result. Okay, just before we move on, I've got a quick question. So so that someone said, is there a hard threshold to qualify for R&D tax credits? And the answer is no, there isn't. There's a few nuances there. So to get the enhanced rate, then there is a threshold. You have to be above that 40% mark to get that higher rate of cash credit. If you are tax paying, then that doesn't matter, but it's that cash credit which is the trigger to be that 40% piece. So there is no hard threshold. It just tricks into a different one for that higher rate if you're above that 40%. And are UK subcontract costs eligible to claim? Yes, they are. UK subcontract costs are eligible to claim as an R&D cost. What you have to watch there is HMRC are very specific that the work has to be undertaken in the UK. So if you had an overseas subcontractor who had an office in the UK as a limited company and you subcontracted to them to do the work, they are not allowed to subcontract it overseas. If you want to make an R&D tax claim, that would not be allowed. So the work, it's all about keeping that work in the UK.
And then there's another question: are consultants not paid through PAYE regarded as subcontractors? Then yes, if it's an external organisation that you're contracting with, they would be regarded as a subcontractor. Obviously, there's a bit of change on the corporation tax rate, so that also affects claims that are going through. So some additional changes.
I think there's one at the bottom there, Ian. So now a senior person in the organisation has to sign off the R&D claim.
That's part of the additional information form, which we'll be talking about a little bit more in detail.
Okay.
But as part of the additional information form, not only does a senior person have to sign it off, but you also have to declare if an external organisation or person has supported you in creating that claim, so that HMRC are aware of who is working in this environment.
Cool.
So other changes, obviously they introduced the SME intensive industries, which is 40% of overall expenditure, which gives you back which returns the 14.5% cash in on the enhanced value to give you 27p in the pound. There has been a consultation that's going through to look at combining the SME and RDEC schemes, and this is potentially from the 1st of April 2024, though we've not seen any results yet of that consultation and what the thoughts are going forward. There seems to be a theme that they are interested in following RDEC type schemes. So they've done this with creative industries, where they're moving down to an RDEC type scheme on the creative industries tax.
Do you mean that is then what's called an above the line credit?
It's an above the line credit.
So,
whereas SME reduces your profit, the RDEC adds to your sales value because it's classed as an income as part of your accounts.
And the importance there is that if you're part of a big group of companies, they said that leaving the old large company scheme tucked inside the tax comp meant that group companies reporting up the structure, it wasn't recognised that the UK was a great place to undertake R&D. By making it an above the line credit, so it sits in your profit and loss, when reporting takes place, you can clearly see that the UK government has assisted in R&D in the company. And I think that was one of the key drivers, so it could be more easily recognised at group level. So it's interesting that if they do combine them, that's what they do. But they've not actually said whether they're going to reconcile whether an SME will get exactly the same as RDEC yet, have they?
Yeah, so, no, we don't know the details of what their thoughts are. Maybe something will come out in the RDCF in the meeting with HMRC later this month. Certainly hope so, but it'll be interesting to see. Obviously,
any updates from that committee meeting we'll put out on through LinkedIn and WhatsApp and whatnot.
We certainly will do. Additional information form, that's a big focus on what HMRC are doing. Obviously, currently, companies it's optional whether you actually put in an R&D tax credit report as to what your narrative is. And some companies do, some companies don't. But from the 1st of August, it's going to be compulsory that every R&D claim has to be reported through this portal, which means that it probably helps HMRC in the fact that at least the reports will be in a common format. Every consultant out there, us and all competitors, accountants, they all do different formats, and that makes it harder for HMRC to understand what the R&D is because they've not got a common format. So that will be hopefully a benefit. One of the downsides to the additional information form is that you can't put pictures onto that portal. We strongly believe that pictures are an asset into an R&D report's narrative because it can help to explain the complex nature of R&D. If you're trying to explain it verbally only, I think that is a downside. And we have asked the question of HMRC if pictures are going to be introduced going forward at some point.
So just on that, Ian, so I think what we're looking to do as a company is still produce our reports as we would do. The project write-ups will be exactly what is needed for this, but then if that report we also write is then embellished with pictures and some other descriptions, that can still be submitted electronically with the accounts, but the report write-ups will also be sat in the portal in the format HMRC want to look at.
Yes, yeah,
okay,
exactly. So we don't know whether HMRC will actually look at those additional reports that are submitted as part of the accounts as a PDF. I suspect they'll rely on the online forms only.
Okay, I've got a question there. If a company has an Innovate UK grant, is it still the case that you can claim the RDEC relief on costs outside of the grant? So So with an Innovate UK grant, you look at all your costs, and yes, you might get 70% funding towards it. Because that is essentially what's called notified state aid, you can make an RDEC claim on all the costs in your project. So that all falls under RDEC. If you've done work outside of the Innovate UK grant on a slightly different project and you're an SME, you can claim those under the SME scheme. So you can make some of the claim in RDEC, which is where the grant supports come in, and some of it under SME. And if it's not notified state aid, then the slightly different rules apply. But yes, you can still use an RDEC claim alongside an Innovate UK grant. Okay, Ian.
Okay, right. So next slide. So the additional information form, as I said, the reports used to be optional. From the 1st of August, it's now compulsory to submit an R&D report as part of your claim. And the level of reporting is no different to what's previously been quoted. So if you're 1 to 3 projects, you have to put in all 3 projects. If it's 4 to 10 projects, different projects, then you have to report on 50% of costs by project or overall costs, and introduce projects that cover that 50%. Now, there will be, per project, you then have to put in a narrative as to what that R&D is, and that narrative is the usual narrative of what's the baseline, what's the uncertainties at the start or during the project, how did you go about solving those uncertainties to create what is the advance that you're seeking. And that's the kind of usual story of an R&D project. But importantly, you also have to break down those costs per project. So you have to clearly identify what's the salaries, what's the subcontract costs, what are all the other costs that are associated per project. So that's quite a level of detail that's not been included before. You also have to look at direct and indirect costs. Now, indirect costs has not previously been a big focus of HMRC. What we mean by direct and indirect is a direct R&D cost is an engineer, a developer, a scientist working directly on the projects to solve those uncertainties. Indirect is maybe something like finance or maintenance, or somebody that supports that person in order to enable them to do their job. But there's quite a lot of definition about what can be indirect and what is not allowed as indirect. So it's understanding what the roles are as part of the project.
Okay, so for a bit of clarity on that, you can look at the CURD manuals. So if you Google CIRD, I think it's 80,000, that will then bring up the whole suite of legislation around R&D tax credits. And hidden amongst there is a description of direct and indirect costs. The other thing you might need to look at are the BAYS or the old BIS guidelines for R&D, which are completely open to interpretation, and HMRC have got a very close view on what they want from those BAYS guidelines. But in there, that also talks about direct and indirect costs.
Yes. Yeah.
The slide, just a quick question there, Ian. Will the slides be available after the presentation? We're going to, on our events page, this workshop webinar will be uploaded on there, and you can access it whenever you like from our website.
Okay, there's a comment there. I've developed a natural pesticide proven looking for partner to continue R&D. So not sure if that's a question or just seeking some support.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to partner with a natural pesticides company, get in touch and we'll pay you up. So looking on to, so this slide, I'm not going to go through.
Just before we go on there, so a lot of companies will go, okay, overall, Arthur and Claire both spent 90% of their time on R&D. Let's write up some projects worth 50%, we think. You need to have clearly defined what the other 50% are, and that they need to be eligible R&D costs and meet the BAYS guidelines for R&D. You can't think, oh, well, we can justify half of that with really good R&D, off we go, because HMRC can ask, can you describe what the other 50% of your costs are, what those projects were, and all the rest of it. So they're making it an awful lot more robust on how companies are assessing R&D in within themselves and reporting on it, and making sure that every single penny that you're claiming can be justified against eligible projects.
Yeah, no, exactly. And another important change on the additional information form is HMRC are stipulating that the additional information form must be uploaded before the accounts are submitted. So, you can no longer submit a set of accounts, including an R&D claim, and then follow up with a report. It's got to be the other way around now. That is really important that, accountants are aware that this has to be completed before they submit the accounts. And obviously numbers have to balance between the accounts and the R&D form that's been put in.
Yeah, and really this has been MI5 marketed, hasn't it? This
Oh, yeah.
1st of August deadline, they've not really shouted it out from the rooftops. It's kind of been slinked in at the side, and hence that's one of the main thrusts of this webinar, is to educate people that, as in 4 weeks' time, this is how you will be you'll need reporting.
Yeah.
You got anything on turnaround times for claims, Ian?
Not on current claims. I mean, obviously the target for HMRC is to process claims in about 6 weeks and get them paid. We are seeing, we've got a number of inquiries or compliance checks running, and we are seeing a delay in HMRC processing those by quite a considerable amount. I mean, normally we'd be seeing responses in about 4 weeks. We're now starting to see responses go out to 6 weeks, 2 months before we get anything back as part of all of that. I think HMRC have become swamped with the level of kind of scrutiny that they're putting onto inquiries, and that probably has a knock-on effect on processing general claims.
Yeah.
RDEC claims do generally take a bit longer than SME claim for whatever reason. Yeah. I don't know why.
I would have thought 3 months for RDEC would be kind of about in the right ballpark at this stage. They are variable by the time of the year and when you submit as well. There's always a big rush in December, so they always get delayed out to maybe 4, 5, 6 months. If you've put through, from what you're saying there, is kind of in February, March, then I would expect that to be going through fairly soon, really.
Yeah, but what you could do is, because it's past the kind of deadline of when you should have expected it to be processed, is contact the R&D line and ask for an update as to what's happening with your claim, or check your government gateway portal to see if there's any progress been happened on that. Pesticides, somebody's interested in connecting with you, so we'll make sure you're linked up with on that. So there's another question from Claire. 1st of August date, is it for expenditures starting from this date or for claims being made from this date? It's any claim for any period being submitted after the 1st of August. So if you're actually going back to a December 21 year-end claim, it will have to be submitted through the portal after the 1st of August. So it's just a straight change from, instead of submitting a PDF report, you now have to do it through the portal. And as part of what TBAT are doing, I mean, Sam talked about the report, and we'll carry on doing the Word report, but then we will do the copy and paste into the portal for our clients to make sure that it's done correctly. And then is this for spend from first? No, it's not for spend from 1st of August. It's just for submission of any claim. So it's important that, even if it's a retrospective claim, it has to go through the portal after the 1st of August. If you can get your claim in before the 1st of August, you can still submit it as a PDF report as part of your accounts.
Actually, before the 1st of August, you don't need to put a report in, because that is not legislatively required. It's just strongly recommended.
Yeah,
that you do put in a technical narrative.
And that is certainly one of the flags from HMRC if you don't put a report in to evidence what your R&D is. Okay, so we're going through lots and lots of detail. So this is a quick slide. I'm not going to go through in detail, but these are all the things that we see that mistakes happen with R&D claims. They can be for any number of reasons, and this is why agents like ourselves exist because it is a complex calculation and evidence of the technical report to HMRC to make sure that it is absolutely spot on. So I'll just move on. So HMRC compliance checks and inquiries. On a yearly basis, there's about 90,000 claimant companies a year, both across SME and RDEC schemes. Now, we don't know the exact numbers, but we're certainly aware that in 2022, they launched about 2,500 inquiries. In January 23 alone, they put out another 2,000 letters, and that is obviously rising, and more fraudulent, and not more fraudulent claims, more inquiries are being launched all of the time. So, you know, there is a fair chance now that if you're not reporting your R&D, and that is HMRC's focus, they want to know what is the R&D. You know, if you make a mistake on the calculations, yes, that'll put through a compliance check, but that's relatively easy to solve. Their big target is to look at where is fraud and boundary pushing on R&D claims. So, you know, they want to know the technical focus. From other sources, not necessarily HMRC, but we understand that HMRC have a 30-minute window to understand what the R&D claim is about. Now, that's not long to understand a complex area of R&D. And from that, they will give it a high, medium, or low risk as to what level of R&D it is. Obviously, if it's high risk, that probably means it's going to go into a compliance check. And this is where, you know, companies like ourselves are there to try and make sure that we are putting reports through that are going to put you into that low risk category. You know, so it's about trying to explain to a caseworker at HMRC a complex bit of R&D in a very simple way that allows somebody that's probably not experienced in that sector to understand what that R&D is. Now, that's quite a complex thing to do, and we've found it certainly quite challenging in order to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you can see why they're asking for that technical focus. You know, I've heard of claims going through, well, this company's made a claim because they take second-hand machine tools in, they paint them, replace the bearings, send them out as a newer machine, still second-hand, but claiming R&D on the process they've gone through. Making an R&D claim about the shape and layout of corridors in old people's homes and the colour that you paint the walls. How on earth they can be classed as R&D, and they're the ones that need picking up.
Yeah.
And all the rest of it. So quick question, how could I claim for a project that started June 23 and ends at the end of November 23? It would be in the next year when your accounts finish after November 23. If your accounts finish in, say, July 23, you'll be able to claim the first month in the July 23 year end, and then your next claim would be July 24, where you claim the project costs from kind of August through to November.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So moving on to next slide. So we talked about the kind of technical narrative, and you know, this is what HMRC clearly want to understand from the point of view of what an R&D claim is. You know, what is the project? Why have you undertaken that project? Is it part of the trade that you're undertaking? You know, what is the baseline or state of the art that is available in your sector? You know, what is known, what is unknown, and what is publicly available to you.
And I think one of the difficulties with that one, Ian, is if you're doing a 2-year retrospective claim, how do you describe what the state of the art is, or how do you evidence that if you've got to go back 2.5 years in time? That's really quite a tough one. So we're recommending clients who we work with on a regular, as they start a project, try and make some bullet points or some URLs from web searching about what is the baseline about what they're looking to do over the next 2 years.
Yeah, indeed. So, you know, and once you start that project, what were the uncertainties that you identified, which is what did you not know how to do? And And it's important that those uncertainties are not routine, because if they are routine, if a competent person can routinely solve those uncertainties, then it's not R&D. And by solving those uncertainties, what advance did you take? What advance did you make? And what field is that science and technology in? You know, these are all details that HMRC want to understand. You know, how did you actually go about solving those uncertainties? What did you do? You know, what did you look around? What's publicly available? You know, why didn't it suit what you were trying to do? And therefore, what capability or advance are you trying to create that clearly is not available? And how did you solve that? And importantly, HMRC want to understand who is the competent persons that are working on that R&D. You know, so somebody creating a new process, bit of software for their website, and they've never done any programming before, and they go and have a bash at it, that would not be classed as a competent person. You know, so you either have to have a level of experience or qualifications or both in that sector to be able to demonstrate that you're competent to solve those uncertainties. So
I've just got a question here in
yep.
just before we move on to the compliance checks and timescales. In a grant funded project, is it the company contribution that counts for R&D tax credits, or does grant money spent by the business also? So as I said earlier, Chris, if it's notified state aid, which is the bulk of Innovate UK, then you look at the entire project costs, and the fact that you've had 70% basically means that it is, I can never think of the term in, supported R&D or subsidized R&D. So you can look at all the costs and see what are eligible under the RDEC scheme, and you make the claim under that.
Now,
okay.
This is where it gets complicated, because if you've got ERDF or European funding, then that's classed as non-notified state aid, and taking the same 70%, you'd take the 70% subsidised through the RDEC scheme, but then you could put the 30% that you put in on as non-notified state aid through the SME scheme. So it varies all the time.
Yeah, and it's really quite important that when you make a claim, you can slice and dice that data, and we spend a lot of time helping companies get that set up.
Yeah. Another question. It sounds like HMRC essentially only going for process patentable levels of advancement. Is that a reasonable assessment? I would say not. If a company wants to keep the IP as a trade secret, that is perfectly good R&D. You know, how they protect that IP doesn't matter. It's not a requirement within the process to say that you have to have IP protection in order to do evidence that you're R&D.
And also the base guidelines, although HMRC try and fight this one off with an absolutely baseball bat, they say it has to be an advance to the world in general. But if you look at later on in the guidelines, it's perfectly allowable to have R&D that someone's cracked a piece of technological work, it's not in the public domain, and you go and recreate it off your own skill sets and done internally. One of the guidelines does say that is perfectly reasonable R&D.
Yeah. Okay, so back onto the presentation. So looking at the process that HMRC goes through, you know, it usually starts with 12 questions or a nudge letter, and it can be quite accusational. You know, some of the letters we've seen from HMRC actually accuse companies, they think that they're committing fraud. You know, so they're quite scary letters that are coming out from HMRC if you've not dealt with those before. You then go through a round of questions, and it can go to rounds 2, 3, 4, and each of those rounds could take 60 days. But we're seeing an elongation of those rounds, as I said earlier. What they were doing probably a year ago is they were allowing caseworkers to actually have a call with the company and ourselves, and to be able to explore and understand and ask questions live about that project. We've not seen that being offered recently at all. Now, in our experience of the inquiries that we've closed off, thankfully all the inquiries we've closed off have been to the satisfaction of our clients. The shortest has taken 96 days for the original letter from HMRC through to closure. The longest we've seen is 745 days, and it's an average of 314 days to complete an inquiry. So it's not just the pain and the uncertainty going through and the questions that HMRC are asking. It's also the delay to any payment that is happening to some quite key R&D that you're doing, and you might be, budgeting for that money to be able to do what you want to be able to do with your projects. Beyond that, they do offer a review by another HMRC officer who's had no contact with your compliance check. All we've ever seen from that is that HMRC just back themselves up.
Funny
what
that.
So yes,
funny that.
But what we are now doing and seeing is that claims are moving on to the tribunal and what's called an alternative dispute resolution stage. So a company can apply for a tribunal, and as part of that tribunal, you can opt to go for alternative dispute resolution. Now, ADR is something that's applied to all tax disputes, not just R&D tax credits. And it's a process where you, the client, ourselves, the caseworker, sit in the same room or in a meeting for a day, and with a chairman who is from HMRC, but from what we understand, that chairman is actually very independent. So they will act between the two parties to agree point by point what the dispute is about. And the aim is to come out with an agreement between yourselves and HMRC as to how to close off the compliance check. Now, what we understand is this is quite a good route to go down, because 80 to 90% of ADRs come out with a resolution. That might be a fully acceptance, it might be an adjustment of the claim, but 80 to 90% come out with a resolution from that. Obviously, you can go down the tribunal route, which is quite a legal route, and at all stages of that, we see HMRC wanting to apply penalties. So they have 5 questions. Did you use a tax agent? Do you understand the CURD manual? Have you spoken to HMRC? And a couple of other points. And based on those questions, they will then look at penalties. Now, the table there is what level of penalties is going to be applied. So obviously most companies would expect that you're taking reasonable care with your claim, and whether it's prompted or unprompted disclosure, there should be no penalty. It's only if you're careless, deliberate and concealed, so you're not cooperating with HMRC, the penalties start coming in. So what would we recommend is, if a compliance check happens, cooperate with HMRC fully all the time.
And to be fair, what we found, Ian, is that a lot of the disputes that HMRC have got with our clients, or where they've opened inquiries around what is R&D.
Yeah.
And what is R&D is described in the base guidelines, and by the pure term that they are guidelines means they can be open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think HMRC are using some quite strong arm tactics to basically say that on a lot of claims there is no R&D.
Yeah.
And that is their stance, and it takes a lot of explanation to get round that stance of theirs, and that they stick with one of the early guidelines, that it has to be new to the world to be eligible R&D, and they tend to ignore the fact that one of the later guidelines, I think it's 8 or 9, says if it's new to you and it's not available in the public domain, then that's perfectly good R&D. They would appear to be choosing to ignore that guideline to bolster their stance. Yeah. Also, some of the letters I've seen come out recently are not offering ADR. They're basically saying you can have another review officer, or you can go straight to tribunal. And I think that is just a scare tactic, because small companies where R&D cash is absolutely essential to their ongoing activities, they can't afford the time or the money to go down the tribunal route. So they're going to back out, because they say, yeah, this is just we're getting too far in for the gain that we're going to get, and it's disrupting the entire business. So I think HMRC need to come to a position where they're fair and reasonable with this.
Yeah.
And I think the amount of enquiries they've opened, they were probably thinking that everyone's just going to back out. And what they haven't realised is that everyone's going to fight for their claim. And I think that that's why there's such backlog now in the whole process.
Yeah. So next slide is looking at what the HMRC pushback is. So on projects, they really want to see that the project is undertaken for trade purposes. Baseline, we're seeing HMRC Google something and taking that information out of context and trying to apply it to an R&D claim. They want to state that the advance has to be an advance overall, ignoring this kind of public domain R&D, that it's not available. Uncertainties, they come out with some statements that says that is not a recognised uncertainty, and this route, then they believe that this is routine to be solved by a competent person, and so we're seeing some quite controversial statements coming out from HMRC, which we obviously strongly counter. On the advance, we've seen comments about not a recognised science or technical area, which is ludicrous. That it's already available, but it isn't, because it's not in the public domain. That it's already been done elsewhere, and they've Googled something and they can show that yes, this has been done somewhere else, but it was actually after the timescale when the R&D was happening for the client that we're working with. Approach, you can use routine methods, so test methods and development methods, as part of an R&D claim in order to create that advance. And we've seen claims that says, well, you can't use routine methods. And combining known technology is not R&D, when it quite clearly is, because if you're trying to combine two complex bits of R&D that have never been put together before, that creates R&D in itself. And competent persons, who is competent? Not for ourselves, but I've actually seen from on through some LinkedIn conversations I've been with, HMRC claimed that 30 years experience does not make somebody competent, which was just ludicrous. Now, something I picked up on this week, HMRC apparently are publishing a compliance action plan. Now, whether that is going to be available at the RDCF in July to see what they're going to be doing, I don't know, but it would be interesting to see what their approach is of how they're going to get control of and assess correctly the R&D claims going through. Now, what I would say, this all sounds very scary, and HMRC are making it harder, but if you've got genuine R&D and can evidence the R&D, there is nothing to stop you putting through an R&D claim. Don't feel that this is should put you off, because without the correct support and the right evidence to go along with it, that's where it is important to make sure you're communicating with HMRC what it's about.
Got a couple of questions going on, Ian.
Yeah.
Have you seen many cases of the case officer closing the case having found against the claim without answering the latest rebuttal responses? So yes, we have.
Yes.
They can charge interest from the date that you should have paid your tax. So that's absolutely fine, and that will be accruing all the time up until the claim is either upheld or discharged.
Yeah.
So that's they charge interest anyway, but they will then not charge. Yeah, they accrue interest, but they will not charge it if they find in favour of you and that you have done R&D. So there we go. So that's all tickety boo.
Yeah.
The other question: a new portal for the additional information. Do we know where that is yet, Ian?
Yes, yeah, we've got a link. I'll not find it now because it'll just take me a couple of minutes. But if you search additional information R&D claim HMRC, you should be able to find it using Google, and it's relatively easy to find. You then have to you can actually submit it as a company or as an agent, so it's for both purposes.
So I did see one flash up and then disappear. So it was all gold, blah 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 blah, and then it disappeared. So if that person
okay.
wants to put that one back up or amend it, then that's fine. Pop it over,
Okay.
please.
Yeah, no worries. So looking at why would you want to use TBAT? we have quite a strong R&D tax credit team. So my background is I was a mechanical engineering degree, 8 years at Rolls-Royce, 13 years in production operations management in different companies, spent 8 years on the manufacturing advisory service, visiting about 1,000 companies to understand and advise on where they can improve, and 7 years at TBAT, focusing on the R&D tax credits schemes and becoming kind of the guru in the company. Amongst the team, we are very strongly technical. We have physics, chemistry, computer science, manufacturing engineering, material science, product design, and at levels of degree, PhDs and masters. So it's important to understand what it is that the company is doing. And then we have Elaine and Callum, who are both ICAEW and ACA qualified accountants, to support on the numbers and making sure that we're doing everything correct on that.
And I think the message there is to say, make sure that when you do make a claim, get it as strongly technically and financially evidenced as you possibly can. Now, you might have those skills in-house, your accountant might have them. If you're concerned, reach out to some of the larger R&D tax companies and just check them out and see what response, what skills and resources they've got to bring to bear.
Yeah. So how do we work with clients? Well, when we first speak to a client, we focus on, well, what have you been doing? What is your R&D? And once we've evidenced and are comfortable that you have been doing some R&D, then we can talk numbers and talk ballpark figure, an estimate of what the benefit could be. We then agree a commercial agreement with you. That could be up to 20%, and we do tiered or fixed contracts. So depending on what the position of the company is in, or what the claim could look like, or how your claim is growing, or going the other way. It's quite important that all tax advisors, it is a legal requirement to carry out an AML check. So we're quite comprehensive AML check, which only takes a day at the most, but that is a legal requirement for all tax advisors.
So if you're talking to somebody getting some help to do your R&D tax claim, just ask them about AML. And we get cold calling about, would we like an R&D tax claim doing? So I always ask, oh, what do you do about AML? We don't do anything. What is it? So it's just a level of professionalism within an organization. If they're registered with HMRC for AML, which is what we are, they should be doing that with all of their clients. If somebody's coming along saying we can help you and they don't bother with AML or don't mention it, then think twice about using them.
Yeah. And HMRC fine companies for not carrying out AML. And interestingly, agents have to be registered and provide their certificate number to use the additional information form to be able to use that. So we then fully write up the report, check the numbers, you look at the report, make sure we've got it right. Then we will upload that to the additional information portal. The accountant, we can prepare accounts or resubmissions, but we generally work back through the accountant of the company. And then HMRC hopefully repays the corporation tax or cashes in your losses to get you your money. And then we'll invoice at the end of it, so it doesn't impact your cash flow. So some of the points that I'd raise of so what I've seen of competitors, some competitors out there, not all of them, there are some good competitors out there. Do they focus on the technology first or the money? If a company, an agent is coming in and talking to you about the money first, run, because they're not interested in what the technology is that you're doing. They just want to make sure, they just want to put a claim through. Do they have technical people that understand your technology? So are they able to correctly identify what is the R&D that you're doing? We talked about the AML. The AML is there to look at persons, politically exposed persons, high-risk countries, money laundering for drugs or other purposes, and it is important to do that. Are they asking for high fees? We've seen companies that are asking up to 35% of whatever your claim is. That is too high. They might say, well, actually, it covers the cost of the compliance check. Well, if they're building in the cost of the compliance check, how good are their reports that are being put through if they're expecting a compliance check. Conversely, are they charging very low fees? How much support are they really going to provide going forward? Do they get you to write up the report? We fully write up the reports for our clients. Do they provide a very small report for a high fee? You know, we've seen reports that are half a page when, you know, it should really be being, you know, 5-10 pages long of evidence of what the R&D is. Do they try and push boundaries, encouraging you to utilize more costs in the claim? You know, so if they're continually pushing you to put more costs through, that's a risk. And are there penalties for breaking long contracts? We've seen 5-year contracts where if you try and break after the second year, they will charge you to recoup the profit that they would have had in years 3, 4, and 5, which is wrong. What support do they offer an HMRC compliance check, and at what cost? You know, do they offer free support as part of that? And do they partner with the accountants? We work closely with all our client accountants and support them through the process, checking the CT 600s and the tax comps to make sure that our numbers that we've created have been utilised in the right way. Just aware of the time. So this is kind of a summary of what we've been talking about. You know, HMRC will continue to do more compliance checks, and it's important to do that because HMRC are making sure that they're protecting the public purse. It's our money at the end of the day that they're utilising to support R&D, and they want to identify where the fraud and boundary pushing has happened both by clients and by agents. Obviously, you've got the 1st of August additional information form, so that technical narrative becomes really important. TBAT supports HMRC with compliance checks are necessary. We've supported a number of companies that have submitted claims without our assistance, had a compliance check, and then we've resolved them to the satisfaction of the client. So we're happy to support claims where they are good R&D claims. Did see one where we got asked to support it and the R&D was just noddy, and I just said, just pull the claim because you're not going to get anywhere. Competent R&D, you know, we're a competent team. We understand what the R&D is that's happening and how to explain it in order to support and defend legitimate R&D claims made by competent professionals. So these kind of summary of kind of where we're at.
Yeah. Somebody called Jen has asked a question. So I think what Ian's comment there was, so for us, a lot of if you've got the R&D in a company and we're writing up 3 projects, our rule of thumb, or on average what we end up writing, is maybe between 2 and 5 sides per sub project that we write up. And what Ian was on about is that some clients might only give you a 5-page report, of which 4 pages are boilerplate. There's a front cover, there's a disclaimer, there's the contents, there's a bit about the company, and only 1 page on the technical. And they're actually trying to claim £500,000 of benefit for the company. Now, to us, that just does not stack up in any way, shape, or form to convince HMRC that you've done some bona fide R&D that is fully compliant with the legislation. So a good provider will ensure that HMRC have all the information they need that will allow them to make an assessment to support the claim. And the additional information portal is a way of HMRC ensuring that every claim is appropriately written up and technically evidenced to support the claim.
Question, can you help halfway through an HMRC inquiry? Yes, we can. We quite often do that on a day rate basis and look at, well, actually, what stage you're at, what questions are you being asked by HMRC, what's your R&D, and effectively report that back to HMRC to make sure that we're covering those questions effectively. So yes, certainly we can. Can you explain the EU 70% funded R&D claims again, please? Didn't quite understand that. Right, so for an EU grant, if you've had a project cost of £100,000 and you've had £70,000 worth of support as part of the grant, and the company's then stumped up the other 30,000, because EU is classified as non-notified state aid or de minimis, then the £70,000 goes through the RDEC scheme, and the £30,000 goes through the SME scheme, which is different to Innovate UK, whereby, because that's notified state aid, 100% of the eligible cost has to go through the RDEC scheme. So it's important to understand the source of the funding and how is it classified.
Yeah, and we have some clients that do their own R&D, they get European funding and they get Innovate UK funding. So they're really, really complex claims with lots and lots of spreadsheets breaking out the costs to fully justify each of the different areas.
Yeah. Do you offer a no-win, no fee? If the claim is refused, is there a charge? We will not invoice for companies that have, we're actually looking at one where we might have to pay back a claim for an invoice fee, because HMRC are really pushing on the where they think the R&D is. So yes, effectively, it's a no-win, no fee arrangement.
Okay.
Right, over to you, Sam. This is your
Okay.
baby.
Yeah, there's a few folk left on the call. So so the Innovation Challenge is something that this is our second year of running the competition. Shakespeare's Martineau legal company are our main sponsor alongside us. We've run 4 workshops, which are absolutely fabulous, and they're all available to go and watch online now, because they've happened in the past, in March, April, May, June, all around finance, people, product development, and getting it right with your customers, and how to protect it, and then commercialization. So we've run those 4, and it's really helped people understand, certainly younger companies, what they don't know and what they now need to know to make their companies even better. But we are running the Innovation Challenge. There's a £5,000 cash prize. Plus, a lot of the people who've done the talks with us are offering 5-day packages of their time to help you move forward. So that could be IP protection, it could be lawyers, it could be accountants, it could be PR, it could be marketing, it could be web development, product design. So it's a fantastic competition, free to enter, super easy. 10 finalists. We're having a big event partway through October, where we've got 120, 140 people in the room. A third of those will be investors looking to invest in new start bright companies. So please have a look at the Innovation Challenge, and we hope to hear from you very soon. I think that's that.
Oh, there is one more slide. Quick question: how much does TBAT usually charge for the whole process? The maximum we charge is 20% of the benefit, but it depends on what your claim is. You know, if you're claiming £25,000 benefit, it's going to be 20%. If you're claiming £1 million, it's going to be somewhat less than 20% by quite a considerable amount. So it can vary, which is why we like to get a ballpark figure and understand what your claim value is.
It's being absolutely honest and upfront with understanding the rough numbers and coming up with a sensible proposition that suits everybody's needs.
Yeah.
Okay. Last slide then, Ian. Just a bit.
Our general services. Yes, we do R&D tax credits. We also look at grant funding. So we have 5 bid writers that apply to Innovate UK, DASA, all sorts of different grant application calls. I'm the specialist in video games tax relief. So if anybody wants to make a video game, let me know and we'll get some tax relief for it. Capital allowances. This is not building and plant capital allowances. This is embedded infrastructure into the building, which is dealt with in a slightly more complex way.
Yeah, so it's looking at the entire project costs and breaking them down into the different areas to maximize the different capital incentives that HMRC run.
Accountants out there will support you on the plant in the building. That's relatively easy to do. Investment side, SEIS, NEIS application support, and help with processing and patent box. So if you do have a patent in the UK or EU, then you can opt into patent box, which gives you back a corporation tax reduction of roughly 10%. So you pay about 10% instead of 19% corporation tax. So well worth looking at. Oh, I've just noticed Leicestershire Innovation Festival's just snuck in there.
Yeah.
Topic
So
from a
we're
previous
doing
presentation.
an event at the Leicester Innovation Festival. So.
Yes.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much for listening. I hope that's been of interest to you. Well done, Ian. Terrific presentation. Sorry for keeping to butt in, and thank you for all the questions that people asked in the chat. It will be available for you to retrospectively look at on our events page. We will be doing another one of these probably in September when we've had the R&D consultative forum, the results from that and any changes that are coming out. So thanks so much. Please get in touch if you've got any questions. Happy to talk to anybody. And yeah, enjoy yourselves and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much indeed.
Right. Thank you for your time.